The chamber breathed in silence. Cameras hovered like unblinking jurors, their red lights waiting for blood. At the long mahogany table, two men in black robes sat shoulder to shoulder, the architects of decades, now summoned to answer for them. Clarence Thomas leaned slightly back, his fingers locked together, a portrait of calm forged in long wars of scrutiny. Samuel Alito adjusted his glasses, the faint tremor of irritation flickering beneath his judicial poise. Between them, the air felt heavier than the Constitution itself. Representative Jasmine Crockett entered without spectacle. Her steps were measured, neither timid nor theatrical. Every movement carried the intent of someone who knew that power, once summoned, must be used like a scalpel, not a sword. She didn't look at the cameras. She looked only at the justices. "Gentlemen," she began, voice clear enough to still the room. "You've both sworn an oath, not to a party, not to donors, not to ideology, but to the idea that justice must be seen to be just." The sentence landed like a gavel. Thomas did not flinch. Alito's lips pressed together, that small human tell of defensiveness polished over decades of hearings. Crockett let the pause stretch, using silence as an argument. Reporters shifted, sensing the shape of history forming between those few breaths. In a room lined with portraits of past jurists, men who had once ruled with quiet certitude, the present felt suddenly unstable, as if the marble itself might remember the tremors of moral decay. Crockett continued, "Today isn't about guilt or virtue. It's about visibility, about what the people see when they look at you, and whether they still see justice." The lights hummed. Alito adjusted his tie. Thomas's eyes lowered briefly, just long enough to suggest either reflection or restraint. Power, she knew, never yields to accusation, only to exposure. The first question had not yet been asked, but the stage was already set. In that silence, beneath chandeliers and centuries of precedent, the robes no longer looked like symbols of divinity. They looked like costumes waiting to be unmasked. The hearing had begun. The clock above the committee table ticked with judicial precision, every second an indictment. Crockett leaned forward, elbows on the polished wood, the microphone catching her breath like a pulse. "Justice Thomas," she began, "when you sit on that bench, whose confidence do you carry, the people's or your patrons?" A faint murmur rippled through the room. Thomas didn't answer immediately. The pause wasn't hesitation, it was strategy. He had learned long ago that silence could outlast accusation. "I carry the Constitution," he said finally. The words were deliberate, the tone designed to close, not open. Crockett smiled, not mockery but recognition. "And yet the Constitution doesn't accept luxury trips, private flights or undisclosed benefactors. I'm asking about the man beneath the oath, not the office above it." Alito's head turned slightly, his instinct to intervene barely concealed. Crockett pivoted before he could. "Justice Alito, do you believe that impartiality can survive repeated hospitality from those who profit from your decisions?" Alito's jaw set. "I reject the premise," he said curtly. "Our integrity is not for sale." Her tone softened, almost sympathetic. "Then why is it always the powerful who can afford to prove their integrity?" The room tightened. Every reporter felt it, the shift from inquiry to confrontation. The Judiciary Committee had become theatre, but not for vanity, for revelation. Crockett drew out a thin folder, the kind that carried either evidence or annihilation. "Gentlemen, these are travel records, courtesy of the transparency law your court narrowly weakened last term. Tell me, if justice is blind, why does it travel first class?" Laughter flickered in the audience, brief, nervous. Alito straightened, offended by levity in sacred space. "This is beneath the dignity of the court," he snapped. "No," Crockett countered, calm as a verdict. "This is the dignity of the people, asking how their guardians spend the trust they grant." Thomas exhaled, the first visible sign of wear. He wasn't a man easily rattled, but Crockett's questions didn't aim to humiliate. They sought to exhaust the myth that moral authority was immune to scrutiny. In the corner, a junior staffer for the minority party whispered, "She's cornering gods." Crockett leaned back. Her final line measured like closing argument. "You've both reminded this nation that the robe shields the law from politics. Today I ask if it also shields politics from consequence." For a moment, neither justice spoke. The silence didn't belong to them anymore. It belonged to everyone watching. The balance had shifted. The hearing was no longer about corruption. It was about conscience. The lights dimmed slightly as aides projected the documents on the screen. Receipts, travel manifests, donation ledgers. The ordinary symbols of privilege, suddenly rendered obscene by context. Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The facts spoke with surgical precision. We've confirmed over 40 private excursions undisclosed. Jet flights, coastal retreats, yacht stays, each coinciding curiously with cases involving the benefactor's interests. Thomas adjusted his glasses, a small motion, but one that betrayed the strain of memory. Alito stared straight ahead, jaw tight, as if willing the projection to blink away. The judiciary has no army, Crockett continued, her tone almost reverent. Its power is belief. The people believe the robe protects them from power. What happens when that belief is itemized and invoiced? Her aide passed her a sheet, highlighted lines, the ink still fresh. This, for instance, was a trip to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, Hike and Value unlisted, sponsored by a donor whose law firm appeared before your bench 2 months later. Can either of you recall how you justified not reporting it? Alito's composure cracked. Congresswoman, you presume corruption where there is none. Friendship is not influence. Crockett's response was quiet, almost tender. I don't presume corruption, Justice Alito. I measure distance between privilege and perception, and the people are closing that gap faster than you think. A stir moved through the gallery, the public sensing something fragile being pried open. Thomas leaned toward the mic, his tone low, almost weary. I have friends, Representative. Long before I joined the court, I can't sever every tie because you disapprove of who offers hospitality. Crockett nodded. I don't disapprove of friendship. I question why friendship always seems to travel with billionaires. The tension snapped like static. Even the clerks froze, afraid to draw breath. Behind them, the projection changed again. Handwritten notes, courtesy of a whistleblower clerk. Justice Alito, this note references a dinner with donors discussing future rulings. How do you explain that context? Alito's eyes flared. You are misreading private correspondence. It was a dinner among colleagues, not conspirators. Crockett took a long pause, studying him as if through glass. If the difference between colleagues and conspirators depends only on who's listening, then secrecy has already chosen its side. The murmurs turned into audible gasps. Somewhere in the back, a reporter whispered to another, She's not prosecuting them. She's auditing morality. A soft gavel tap from the chair tried to restore order, but the rhythm of revelation had already taken hold. The justices, once icons of composure, now looked unmistakably human, burdened, defensive, exposed. Crockett gathered the papers, stacking them neatly. I don't expect contrition, she said. I expect comprehension, that justice is not a privilege to be financed, but a trust to be lived. She stood, signaling the end of her segment. Though everyone knew the story had just found its pulse, the screen went black. For a heartbeat, the room existed in total silence. Neither condemnation nor forgiveness, only the quiet weight of consequence. As the lights rose, Thomas whispered something inaudible to Alito. They didn't look at Crockett. They didn't have to. The ledger had already spoken their part. The illusion of distance between the law and the world had vanished. By the time the afternoon session resumed, the hearing had shifted from scandal to scripture. The papers were put away. Now came the reckoning of ideas. Crockett stood at the dais, not as prosecutor, but philosopher. Her tone had cooled, and less fire, more ice. Gentlemen, I want to move past money. Let's speak of motive. Not what you took, but why you believed you could. Thomas folded his hands as if preparing for prayer. I have served the Constitution faithfully for 3 decades. I believe in the limits of government, that freedom dies when oversight becomes weaponized. Crockett nodded slowly, almost respectfully. And yet you wield the power to interpret the limits of oversight itself. Isn't that the ultimate government, the one without limit? The question lingered like incense. Alito leaned forward. Congresswoman, judicial independence is not arrogance, it's survival. The courts must remain beyond the reach of politics, including yours. She smiled faintly. Beyond the reach or beyond accountability? The line struck. It wasn't accusation, it was challenge. The kind that forces self-reflection, not surrender. Thomas spoke again, quieter now. Our job is not to please the people. It's to protect the law from their passions. Crockett stepped closer, her voice lowering to a near whisper. And who protects the people from the law when it no longer remembers them? A tension settled that no gavel could break. Even the marble busts along the back wall seemed to listen. She continued, "You interpret the founders' words as sacred, immutable. But the founders owned men, silenced women, and feared democracy. Why does the court cling to their ghosts and call it wisdom?" Alito stiffened, his formality cracking into indignation. "Because principles outlive the flaws of their authors. If you abandon them, you replace law with whim." Crockett's reply came like a knife hidden in velvet. "And yet, if you sanctify their flaws, you replace law with nostalgia." The room erupted, gasps, murmurs, the shuffle of staffers sensing a headline forming in real time. Crockett pressed on. "Every generation claims it is merely interpreting truth. But every ruling is a new scripture, one that decides who gets to live freely and who must ask permission. You've both written those scriptures. My question is, do you still believe they're divine?" Thomas looked up and finally meeting her gaze. "I believe in the text. Everything else is temptation." Crockett held that silence for a long suspended beat. "Then perhaps temptation is where justice begins. The moment law meets conscience." Aides scribbled furiously. Alito leaned back, suddenly quiet. The ideological walls that had seemed impenetrable began to tremble under the weight of moral inquiry. Crockett stepped away from the microphone. "You see, justices, democracy isn't destroyed by corruption. It's undone by sanctimony. When power hides behind principle, it no longer serves the public. It serves itself." The committee chair tried to restore order, but the hearing had evolved into something else, not a deposition, but an existential trial. Crockett gathered her notes, then paused. "You both claim to interpret the law faithfully, but faith without humility is tyranny in robes." The line landed not as insult, but as eulogy, for an ideal that had outlived its innocence. Outside, social feeds exploded. Inside, silence reigned. Thomas shifted his glasses again. Alito's hands twitched near his papers. Crockett said nothing more. She let the echo do the work, the echo of belief meeting consequence. Some hearings end in conclusions. This one ended in confrontation with self. For the first time, the two justices looked less like arbiters of law and more like men who had outlived their own legend. The sun had set outside the Capitol dome, but in the digital sky it was dawn. 1,000 screens lighting up with the same question: who judges the judges now? Within minutes, clips of the hearing flooded every platform. Crockett's voice, calm, deliberate, unflinching, became both anthem and ammunition. On one side, she was hailed as the conscience of Congress. On the other, as a partisan executioner with a microphone, the networks looped her final words like scripture. "Faith without humility is tyranny in robes." Anchors debated tone, not truth. Panelists passed her pauses as if divining prophecy. One pundit smirked. She didn't cross the line, she redrew it. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court's Public Information Office released a sterile, 5-sentence statement. The justices stand by their record of integrity and impartial service. It read like a verdict written in fog. Outside the courthouse, protesters gathered by candlelight, students, veterans, retirees, some carrying pocket constitutions, others holding signs that read, "The law is not a luxury." Crockett watched the coverage from her office, the glow of the TV washing over scattered notes. Her aides celebrated online engagement metrics. She watched faces. She didn't smile. Victory wasn't the word for what had just happened. Disruption was. Her phone buzzed with messages, congratulations, threats, invitations, each one proof of the fracture she had triggered. She read one headline aloud: "Crockett exposes the bench." She murmured, "No, the bench exposed itself." In chambers across the city, power recalibrated. Lobbyists whispered of judicial reforms. Senators eyed new oversight bills. Even some conservative commentators, normally loyal to the court, called for restoring moral distance. But within the high walls of the court, the mood was colder. Clerks whispered about damaged prestige. One justice, unnamed but presumed, reportedly said, "She made us mortal again." Crockett turned off the television. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence, the same hum that always followed revelation. In the age of performance, truth wasn't enough. It had to trend. She exhaled, steady. "Let them argue," she said quietly. "That's democracy fighting for breath." Outside, the city pulsed with contradiction, praise and outrage in equal measure. And somewhere, in the quiet chambers of judicial authority, two men in robes prepared their own defense, not of law, but of legacy. The narrative had escaped the courtroom. It belonged to the nation now. Night fell heavy over Washington, the kind that turns marble into shadow. The Capitol lights still glowed, but the air carried the hush of consequence, that fragile moment when history pauses to decide what it will remember. Behind closed doors, the aftershocks began. Senate aides whispered in elevators. Clerks drafted memos, careful with verbs. In private chambers, Thomas and Alito met in silence, the air between them charged with quiet indignation. Thomas spoke first. "They forget what restraint costs," he murmured, his voice more reflective than angry. "We're not politicians." "We don't defend ourselves in sound bites," Alito replied without looking up. "We don't need to. The institution defends itself by outlasting its critics." But his tone lacked conviction. Even he knew endurance wasn't the same as absolution. Across town, Crockett sat alone in her office. The corridors had emptied. The echo of the hearing still lingered. She studied the transcripts, every word, every pause. Power leaves fingerprints in silence, she thought. And today the silence had spoken louder than any denial. Her aide entered softly. "You did it," he said. "You cracked the court." Crockett shook her head. "No. I revealed the crack that was already there." On the news screens, legal scholars debated constitutional limits. Party leaders drafted statements carefully designed to sound principled without sounding partisan. The city thrummed with the politics of aftermath, everyone claiming the moral center, few daring to occupy it. In one office, a senior justice's clerk asked, "Will this change anything?" The justice sighed. "Change? No, but it will linger. That's how institutions bleed, not from wounds but from whispers." Crockett closed her files and looked out at the Capitol dome, majestic, illuminated, indifferent. She whispered, "Let them whisper. The echo will do the rest. For every televised storm there is a quiet reckoning, and it had already begun." Morning broke with the calm cruelty of routine. The court released its opinions for the week, unsigned, unshaken, unbothered. No mention of the hearing, no hint of apology. The marble facade did what marble does best, endure, but endurance is not immunity. Inside the legal world, whispers became doctrines of their own, about ethics, about transparency, about the invisible cost of reverence. Law professors rewrote syllabi. Editorial boards spoke of the Crockett standard, accountability without theatrics. Crockett didn't appear on morning shows. She understood the rhythm of impact. The quieter the victor, the longer the echo. In the stillness of her office, she reread her opening line. "You've both sworn an oath, not to power, but to justice." It still burned, even on paper. Outside, the Supreme Court stood untouched, but not unmarked. Justice, she thought, doesn't fall in public. It erodes in silence. When truth survives the silence, whose faith does it restore, and whose does it condemn?